Hello, Savannah. Hello, 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 Savannah. So excited that we have arrived at yet another Monday off of the cuff of a busy week. Busy week. I don't know if we want to call it productive or not, in that we had a huge issue we were faced with, in that we were advocating for residents of the West Side. You know, the weeping time was a huge issue where the residents were advocating to have the property known as the Bartow property, but also known as the Weeping Time property. We were advocating to make sure we kept with keeping the use, maintaining the use. And so, unfortunately, we are now at a juncture where council voted on a 5-4 vote to approve the special use permit for the Salvation Army, and it's the usual 5-4. I wasn't a part of the five that voted. Alderwoman Alicia Miller Blakely, Alderwoman Bernetta Lanier, and Dr. Estella Shabazz dissented in that we were not interested in approving a special use permit for that property, as we were more interested in upholding the desire and wishes of the West Side residents, in addition to assuring that we were keeping with the spirit to maintain the sanctity and value and honor the lives lost to the largest slave sale in U.S. history, right here in Savannah, Georgia. If you want to find out more, you can go to my Facebook page. There are several posts, there are several videos that give account of exactly what happened during that meeting. And so, for those of you who have any question about our advocacy and how we have persisted on council to date, this is a telltale sign of exactly what the issues are at City Hall. Chief among my disappointment was that the voices of the residents of the West Side were silenced, and that the mayor did not allow over 25 residents who were poised to speak and allow their voices to be heard with regard to what they desire for the property, with regard to what they see as value in that property. So we want to continuously encourage citizens to engage and to advocate. But when we encourage you to do that and you come to the table and there are no chairs for you to have a seat, we're here to advocate for you. And so we will continue to work on your behalf in that regard. Other items are consistent with the fact that we had an individual to pass away. I think is the most dignified way you can put it, in the interrogation room in the barracks on Haversham Street. To date, the family has not heard from the chief of police of our department. And so last week, myself and a few other older women, Alicia Miller Blakely and Bernetta Lanier, found it fitting to exhibit some level of compassion and empathy and reach out to the family, not giving regard to any litigious matters at all, but simply to extend our regret that this mother now has to bury her son, who was also her caregiver. A lot is going on in this city. A lot is going on in the city of Savannah. Today, we had an executive session, and in that executive session, among discussions of all that happened in those barracks is still to be determined. We have not completed an internal investigation, and the GBI investigation is also not complete. And so, unfortunately, we are not left with much to give to the public, and that's disappointing. So, we are continuing to press, and we are continuing to advocate for our law enforcement. We are, as a council, also expected to protect and serve our law enforcement, who is supposed to protect and serve our citizens. Our law enforcement has been crying out for quite some time. Many individuals within the department have real issues, and those issues have not been responded to. And among the many things we spoke of in executive session today, please know that we have made your issues known. There isn't one department within the city of Savannah where we as a council in one capacity or the other have not heard something related to unfair treatment of staffers within the department. And so we want to let you know that we have requested time and time again an external review of all of our city departments, as we have received complaints from code compliance, community services, sanitation, the police department, the HR department. It's really overwhelming. And so when we are not having our voices heard within this administration, it is my intent to make these things public, because that seems to be the only thing that moves this administration. It's not enough for us to be at the table and operate in a manner in which you sent us to at City Hall when you elected us. And so if our voices are being silenced, and if your voices are being silenced, what are we left to? And so I am hopeful that with this next city manager search, if it's not interrupted, that we will find someone who is able to come and turn this big ship of Savannah around. She needs to be turned around. And until that time, I'm just really feeling heavy and full tonight because of the number of complaints that we've received from city staff, and the response that I received from the city manager today was not what I felt like would be a response where he received the message and is inclined to do something about it. And the same was with the same city manager. He left amidst all of this, and nothing was done. And now we have yet another city manager. And so now you see the pattern and the theme. In large part, the real problem is there's been a lack of continuity in leadership. We have gone through probably about 5 city managers, to include the interim city managers, in less than 7 years. 5 city managers in less than 7 years. That's a lot to ask of staff. But we're going to continue. We're going to continue to advocate. We're going to continue to ask the tough questions. We're going to continue to press. We have issues from everything to individuals bringing guns on one individual in particular. We have city staffers who are afraid because this person has been allowed to bring a gun to work in a building where it's posted that says no weapons allowed on the premises, not one time, not 2 times, but multiple times. and nothing has been done about it. I think the person's actually like on vacation now. So what is it going to take? What is it going to take? We have situations where individuals are just asking to have their salaries moderately reviewed so that they are earning a livable wage here in the fine city of Savannah. But we discover that the mayor's assistant, who was supposed to be only on the job for 6 months, she was supposed to be a fill-in or a buffer until he could find someone who's going to be here temporarily. And a year and 4 months later, she's still with him. She's received almost a $15,000 raise. And the mayor's response today was he had nothing to do with that. How do you not have anything to do with your assistant getting a $15,000 raise? So any City of Savannah staffer can go to Jeff Grant at the Human Resources Department and say, I need you to do a salary review because this person makes this and we have a lateral position and so I should make that. I'm going to encourage all of our staff to contact Jeff Grant at the HR department and ask for a salary review and see if you will be as lucky as the mayor's assistant to get an increase. Hopefully all of you won't get a $15,000 raise. I don't think we can afford that. And these are all items that were not voted on. So you see there, from people dying in our barracks to people not being happy at work. This is all a part of municipal government. Municipal government is not free of problems. But when municipal government is free and void of intentionality to fix the problems, that's what makes us have a worse problem. So we want you to know that we're pushing hard, we're advocating, and we're really, really trying. Where is it going to get us? I don't know. But we're going to continue to just give it to you straight. And so as we go forth, we're going to try to keep focus. We're going to try to keep focus on some of the things that really, really matter. And one of the things that really, really matter to me, one of the missions that is rape advocacy and prevention education when it comes to sexual assault. As you know, I stated earlier in the month that this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And in keeping with giving you information and education, encouraging and inspiring our survivors, as well as equipping our public with information you can use so that we are actually preventing rape, I have a special guest tonight who will share with us her survivorship and what she has coming up and what's next. So without further ado, I want to present to you all Miss Brittany Brett.
Hello.
Hello, Brittany. Hello, hello, hello. How are you?
I'm good, Kesha. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. Listen, I feel better already seeing your face.
I know. It's been way too long.
Yes. Listen, I jumped out of the pot into the fire, during my stint at the Rape Crisis Center, where we provided resources and advocacy to victims of rape and sexual assault and prevention education to youth and adults. It was work that was draining emotionally and painful, but it was rewarding, particularly when we see our survivors not heal from sexual assault or rape, but when we see them get through and evolve. And that's what I see in you. And that's the part of the work that sort of drives you and brings you alive and encourages you and inspires you to work aggressively toward preventing this crime, preventing this vile act from ever happening to anyone. And so we met through my husband.
Yep.
You were
small world.
Yes. It is a small world. And we never know how our paths are going to cross. And despite the fact that we had the unfortunate circumstance of connecting in the way in which we did, and actually that was before I was at the Rape Crisis Center,
Right.
he contacted me after learning of your victimization, and I made a referral. And so let's take us from there, Brittany. You were here at Savannah College of Art and Design.
Yep. So in 2004, I can't believe how fast time flies. So I was, yeah, attending SCAD at 2004, and I was on a sports team. So Coach Carter, your husband, Sam Carter, was my strength and conditioning coach. And I was kidnapped and raped just before the end of my freshman year. And I can't remember exactly how much longer school was in for, but I still continued to go to my athletic events, and that being said, see Sam. So, and I was really open with it right away. My coaches from the team and my captains, they're the ones that met me at the hospital. So like, it was a very, like family oriented, people at SCAD were like my family. So right from the get-go, he was very aware and involved and always wanting to help.
And this happened right in downtown Savannah.
It did in broad daylight. So it was about 1 p.m. on a Friday, and I was getting into my vehicle, broad daylight, and I was met from behind with a gun as I was getting out of my car. And as I leaned up, there was a gun to the back of my neck. And it seemed like at first he was wanting to rob me because he asked for my wallet. But then it quickly became aware that he was disheveled himself in what he was saying. And my truck had Florida license plates on it. And he wanted me to drive him to Florida. And it was just all very much a blur, especially because a gun was to the back of my neck. But long story short, he did ask me to get in my vehicle, and he wasn't able to drive, he said. So I climbed back over his lap and he made me drive. All the while, I drove past other students, I drove past other people, and there was a gun to my leg, and he just kept telling me to drive. So it was, looking back in hindsight, I probably would have done things different, and I'll get to how I did escape. But we ended up, so that was downtown Savannah, and we ended up driving, I'm not sure what the area is called, but I think all the way down MLK and then like a left on Bay Street. And then you would go more west, and then in the right of there, that's a residential area. So I'm not really sure what area that's called. But that being said, it's residential. It was the middle of a work day on a Friday, and just nobody was around. So he asked me to pull over at some point and asked me to go into the woods. And at that point, I did just try to like talk to him, even though it was so scary to me. I don't know if it was watching too much TV, but I was like constantly trying to find a way to escape or just, but the fight or flight thing, when you have a gun to you, it just, you kind of just go along with it. So that being said, I did not try to fight or run, and I was raped. But afterwards, and I think that I told you before, I kind of at that point decided, like, I really thought that I was going to die, and I was prepared to fight back at whatever cost that took, because in my mind it was already over, which I know sounds really daunting, but it's just how it was. So he did ask me to get back in my truck, and at that point, I pretended like it wouldn't start, and I pretended like it wouldn't go in gear, but I did have it turned over, and I revved my RPMs up as fast as it would go. And when he clicked it into drive, I was ready, like with my hand on the wheel, and he hit his head on the dashboard. And the universe, an angel, somebody sent me a truck around the corner, and those people are fine, but I did get into a head-on collision with them on purpose, and I jumped out of my vehicle. So those people were fine and shook up, but when I jumped out and I rolled away from my vehicle, he ran away in the other direction. And I just remember laying on the ground and watching him run down the street and around the corner. I remembered what he was wearing, but that was it. And unfortunately, the men that I got in a head-on collision with, they were really shook up. They were vets themselves from the military, and they didn't understand what was happening when I was asking them for help. So I got back into my vehicle until I found a police officer and was able to flag them down. And that wasn't until I believe it's like a SunTrust Bank or something like that, back into downtown. And they were able to take my police report then, which was still, that was a hard thing to like cry out for help. But in the moment, I didn't know at the time that that would change the whole entire trajectory of my healing process, was reporting it instead of just running back to the dorms and telling my friends. Like that really, that moment of reporting it was set the entire catalyst of my journey to where I am today, 15, about to be 16 years later.
And the way you describe it is almost as if it still happened yesterday, and that's why we are cautious when we talk about healing or having healed. This is
Absolutely.
something that you never ever heal from. You never heal from. We work through it. We
Right.
work through it. But in this, in what you described here tonight, you see so many factors. And I would imagine that this is gripping a lot of people with fear tonight because you just don't know. And for years, you didn't know.
Right.
You did not know who the perpetrator was. And through the set of circumstances with the trauma of being in a car accident, in addition to being sexually violated, you fortunately had the foresight and the mindset to get help. And I want to say that there are so many victims who are not courageous enough to get the help in that moment.
Right.
There are many types of rape. Yours would be classified as a stranger rape, which is often very violent, and weapons are often used. And so it makes it extra traumatic. Not that any other rape is less traumatic. Um, you went to the hospital and were subjected to this very probative process where you actually had to explain to strangers who were probably friendly police officers and sexual assault nurses called SANEs. They're called SANEs, sexual assault nurse examiners, or medical staff. And people need to know what that process looks like. And I generally tell people that it's like explaining what your last sexual encounter was in full detail. One, who wants to do that in ordinary times? And then to have to subject your unclean body to a very probative examination, much like a gynecological exam, where evidence is collected. And that's where I want to start here now.
Yeah.
I think people
So,
understand that process.
yeah, you and I have talked about before that this is definitely a message that I want to talk about more, because it is so often the thing that comes up when I mentor people and ask them why they didn't report, that they say that they don't want to relive it. And of course, in that moment, I think that it is a defense mechanism to think that you will be able to forget it. I remember emailing my teachers saying, like, I was raped, but don't worry, I'll have my homework in by Monday. You really have this misperception that it is going to stick with you a while. So to do things like go to the hospital and do the reporting is actually so beneficial toward the whole healing process. So I'm really glad that you asked about the hospital, because for me, looking back, I don't remember that time as being so traumatic. I I was scared, but immediately, like you said, there's a whole team of people that are professionally trained to meet you. They're professionally trained how to speak to you, how to handle like every little situation. So I was met there with not only nurses, the same nurses, but also that's where I met my detective and an advocate who helped me tell my family, which I probably otherwise would have been so terrified to do. So at the hospital, there was a whole encompassing thing there, not just them looking over my body to see what happened for evidence, which ended up being very crucial. It ended up being the entire court case, in fact. So because it was a stranger to me. So, when I got to the hospital, I was able to ask friends to meet me there. But before I ever saw any of my friends, I went into the examination room where a group of women, they were so kind and calm. I remember them being apologetic, and I just kept saying it's okay because as women, when you do your annual checkups or anything like that, it was even kinder than that. It was just a very like, I had leaves on my, jeans and things like that, and they took evidence pictures. Obviously, they had to take swabs from my body, but it was so professional and so calm, and they're obviously very well trained. It was actually comforting to just, and this is in hindsight, I don't know that I was comforted in the moment because it was 15 years ago, but in hindsight, I do remember that as just being like, somebody understands what I went through, and somebody's like, they're trying to help me. And they kept saying that. So right after that, there was a detective waiting for me. And there was a room that I was able to go to where an advocate was able to say, like, look, these are the next steps. And had I not taken that first initial step to flag down the officer and say that, and then they said, let's go to the hospital. It was this whole snowball effect that I'm sure otherwise I wouldn't have known what steps to take. And it really set me up for this whole domino effect of a timeline to finding justice. And we've mentioned before, in finding justice, which is a couple steps ahead here, I do think it really was a part of my healing process. I know that. And like I said, this is all in hindsight. I didn't know at the time, but I'm just stressing the importance here also of doing a rape kit test. The main thing is that your DNA sample is taken from the crime scene. So although photos were taken and my story was taken, in situations like whether it's a stranger or somebody the bottom line is when it comes to DNA, that's it. That in the court of law, DNA is your main thing that is going to stand up, or at least did for me anyways. And I don't see why it would be different for anybody else, aside from the complex side matter that we do need to address. DNA kits being tested, more DNA kits being tested.
Yeah.
So
in 2018, even after the passage of Senate Bill 304, sponsored by Representative Scott Holcomb in Atlanta, the Compassionate Care Act called for the expedient submission of kits, not processing, submission.
right.
And so I get so full thinking about this. So what that meant was no longer could law enforcement or detectives just leave the kits on the shelf. So the process is a survivor, because once a victim, always a survivor. We don't call victims anymore once you survive that, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so if you go through the most painful and challenging acts of your life, and you put your all in that kit, where you have entrusted your body to the care of these professionals, I used to say not only is your DNA and possibly the perpetrator's DNA in that kit is your future.
Right. 100%.
Is an opportunity for you to get justice. In that kit is an opportunity for you to come face to face with this offender. So in that kit is more than just your DNA. In that kit is probably what helped you on your journey today. Because Brittany, I'll tell you firsthand that there aren't a lot of uh, women who experience rape uh, at your age and during that time who is where you are today. Because rape is the most egregious offense that a person could experience and live through, only second to homicide.
Right.
Many victims want to die or wish they had died, as opposed to living through that hell every single day, being reminded of it. And so we honor your survivorship tonight. And I'm so glad you called me as we started to talk about a survivor story. Uh, we started to talk about what are the next steps? What do we do
Right.
next? You called me and you said, Kesha, I survived this and I've been living fairly productively. Uh, and for some reason, every now and again, I have something that's magnetic where other victims are concerned or where other survivors are concerned. So you've had times where you have actually provided support in encouraging a survivor to report. You've provided support to assisting a survivor after they reported and while they're trying to reconcile what they have been going through. And so you were only able to do that um, primarily because of that justice, but that justice did not come easily. And I want people to know that still today, even after processing the uh, over uh, 3,000 kits, we still have at least, um, I think at last count, presently about 1,600 that's still kind of in the pipeline to be processed. Um, Kits generally should be processed within 30 days. That's still very, very challenging. And as a result of uh, that time frame, Representative Scott Holcomb also introduced another bill this year that passed and actually will be enacted in 2021, and that was a tracking system
Yeah.
for rape kits. So because the process is so long, uh, it gives victims some semblance of encouragement to know where the kit is in the process of being tested.
Right.
Was there a DNA match? And we want to go back to um, talking about your connection with survivors and how we now are starting to chart our courses toward identifying what it is you are going to do next. But previous to that, Brittany, I think it's important for us to tell people that because of your courage and because of your bravery in going through that examination, having your DNA entered into the CODIS system, and CODIS is a combined DNA index system, and it's a system where DNA of all offenders is collected, and it helps law enforcement identify individuals who may be linked to a crime, and it helps to start an investigation that generally should be successful, as you stated, if there's a DNA match. And so in your case, it was almost 5 years later.
Correct. And actually, I think I don't know if I've even ever told you this part of the story, but years prior to, I want to say like a year or two after, I was constantly going into the precinct to do not, you don't do a lineup in person all the time. It's a photo lineup. And my detective really thought that we had found the man at one point. And so when the DNA was tested, it turned out that it was not him. So fast forward to I was no longer a student any longer. And she called me and said, there's been a match. He was picked up on drug charges in Atlanta. And when his DNA was randomly put into the system, there was a match. But the catch here is that he had the exact same name as the man from a couple of years prior, the exact same name. And it was just a coincidence. But that being said, when we did go to court and, you know, these things start off on a he said, she said basis. And I really, because I was unable to look at him, I left that part out at the beginning, but he really was adamant, like, do not look at me. And it was only until I was turning on Bay Street, which is a busy intersection, that I looked to my right quickly, just, you know, for traffic. And I did catch a glimpse of him, and I was able to see him in that moment. And that was kind of etched in my mind. But you've got to understand, in the court of law, that and my story was all I had. And now here I am saying, oh, this guy has the same name. So as you can imagine, the person representing him, that was like a huge fighting point for them. And all that they had was the DNA. So, and I remember when my DNA was being processed, my detective contacted me, like, very happy, very excited. Your DNA has been being processed. And I remember being confused, like, okay, well, why wouldn't it be? You know, and because, like, I gave it to you guys about a month ago.
Yeah.
But now I know, obviously, like, I'm very grateful that it was just like the luck of the draw that mine was. And
well, and to that point, less than the luck of the draw, unfortunately, in some instances, at least on my watch at the Rape Crisis Center, during my time there, you know, detectives kind of picked and chose what they deemed as a viable case or winnable case, or how truthful they felt the victim was. And that oftentimes determined if that kit was going to sit on the shelf or if it was going to be sent to GBI for lab processing. So,
well, and then the sad part is, like, you could see, yeah, there was obviously a man out there at large with a gun doing these things in broad daylight. Mm-hmm. But as we've mentioned before, when I gave a speech at the Rape Crisis Center, we've talked about there's other women and men too, but out there whose rape kits are not being tested, and they have been through traumatic things. So it is sad that it has to be picked like that. And I love that there's an app now to track this, but I also want to counter all of that frustrating information and say, don't let that deter you from not reporting because you think that maybe yours won't get tested. So what's the point? Like, you've got to still report, because the DNA, like, hopefully will be tested. Because, like I said, in the court of law, at the end of the day, when they gave their arguments, their statements, it all came down to the DNA. It didn't matter what he said, she said. It was just the science.
Right. And, you know, you said something earlier that took me back a little bit. You said that you were terrified to tell your family.
Yep, absolutely terrified.
And this brings us to another dynamic when we look at how victim blaming first starts with the victim.
Totally. Yep. Absolutely.
Even in a case of such a violent act that involved kidnapping at gunpoint, you still blamed yourself. You still ask, well, what did I do? I should have done this. I should have done that. And so that's why we work so hard with trying to get the public to understand how important it is not to blame the survivor.
Right.
Don't victim blame. Don't judge.
Yep. I mean, I think this victim blaming has been going on for centuries. I mean, and that was another part of this in my speech that I gave, that whether, you know, because I was wearing jeans and a tank top, and what if I had done this? What if I had done? And now I'm learning that it's a defense mechanism that your psyche does go through, that you try to stay in control. And had you been doing something different, you could have avoided it, and therefore in the future avoid it. But yeah, I said in the speech, look, back when women used to wear collared shirts and covered their ankles, people were still being raped. Right. Like, this is not new to history. Right. What's new is, are we going to advance as a society or not? Are women going to be able to speak up in safety or not? Like, that's right. What's new here, not the fact that this victim blaming is just very old news. Like, it is not, it needs to especially be understood by the victim or survivor that it just was never your fault. And that's a really hard thing to wrap your mind around. And sometimes it takes a lot of time, but it is possible to come to the conclusion that it wasn't your fault.
Yes, it is. It really is. And please take Brittany's advice and understand that. Ivan Cohen is asking me a question. When rape kits are badly backlogged, is this due to not enough personnel in the lab for testing? That actually was the case after the passage of Senate Bill 304, which calls for expedient submission of the rape kits. And so what happened, this bill required that law enforcement officials submit all these kits within 30 days of them coming into their possession. So that meant all over Georgia, they were receiving all of these kits. But unfortunately, we did not have the personnel or the equipment to absorb the influx of these kits. And so I understand from Representative Holcomb that things are getting better. But initially, the backlog started because detectives were not submitting the kits at all, because they were deciding what cases needed to be investigated and which cases didn't. And so once these kits nationwide started to be put into these coded systems, the hits were going off all over the place. Because in your case, Brittany, just like we see that your connection to this offender was not because of another rape, it was because of a drug charge. So here we see that rapists are not specialists.
Right.
They commit a myriad of crimes. And rapists are recidivists. That means they're going to do it over and over and over again.
Well, especially if they get away with it.
Right. Well, and in fact, when they've committed when they've committed or when they are identified, it's probably not the first time.
Correct. Yeah.
And so we are making advances, and I have to make a plug here for Representative Scott Holcomb again. You know, I keep acknowledging how much we are so grateful to have a man in the state houses who is helping to stop rape. And that's how you stop rape. As a man in the state house, he's introducing policies and legislation that basically speak to making or forcing our law enforcement to do what they are supposed to do. But also now we have this tracking system. And so when we are looking at rape as a public health issue, and incorporating policies and procedures that will help us keep these people off of the street. That's essentially what this comes down to, because the fact of the matter is there's only a small percentage of the male demographic that commit multiple rape. So the more of them we get off of the street, the better we are and the safer we are. Now we have talked about judging, victim shaming. We've talked about how assailants are identified or identifying assailants. And I will tell you that you were one of the lucky ones, and that so many victims never ever know who their rapist was, particularly in those episodes of stranger rape. We have heard your voice, a survivor's voice. And so now, Brittany, as we discussed on Sunday, what next? What next? What are you going to do with all of that power in you now? Because I can see it. I can feel it. I heard it in your voice. You are just exuding just this wonderful, healthy perspective of your journey. So what do you do with it? How do we help you identify these next steps? And tell me what it is that you see yourself doing.
Well, the first thing is like what we're doing now is openly, candidly talking about it. And like I've always said before, I think that it needs to not be a thing that people are embarrassed to bring up, embarrassed that they had happen to them, and be comfortable to talk about it. And that being said, like all of the people that I have met, men and women that are survivors, all not only have different stories, but they have different ways of healing. And some of them I've helped along the way, and others have helped me. And all of this different advice coming together, I feel like needs to be shared now more than ever. And how do we share it, I guess, is kind of the question. There are so many, like what we're doing now, this is amazing. You have YouTube, you have Instagram, there's podcasts, there's everything. So my goal now is to kind of bring the community of people that I've met together, including yourself, and ask them, what do you know? How can you help educate? Is it, going to be another survivor explaining how their father abused them and how they finally came out to their mother and what they did to heal over the past 10 years after she's kept it to herself for 15 years? Or is it somebody like me who immediately went to law enforcement and can help mentor people going through the justice system? Because another young girl that I mentor now, she and I crossed paths at the age she was 14, and she was met with the opportunity of should she press charges or not, and she didn't want to. And I was able to help explain to her this shouldn't be a scary thing, and how do we go through the process. So with all of that information, I am hoping to bring conversations together of not only different survivors and all the different ways that they've healed through, whether it's traditional therapy or like somebody that I know is from Venezuela and she talks to people that do traditional healing back there and everything in between, but also the professionals like yourself in the field that what does it look like when I go to a rape crisis center? What does that even entail? They might be scared to go into a public place. There are group settings that you can go and talk to that might look scary. So if we could have you like explain, what does that look like? Or talking to detectives, what does that process look like? To talk to nurses that are sane nurses, go through the process. I think the more that we shed light on something that's dark, the less scary it becomes.
Yes.
I don't know. I thankfully moved through the part where I thought that it was my fault quickly. I did struggle with it for a long time, and it slowly went away. And I'm grateful for that because now I can use my voice and openly and candidly talk about it. But my story is only a splinter of the big picture. But I do love having conversations with tons of different advocates, tons of different survivors, people, politicians that are really making change in this world, because sometimes without them, like the DNA kits being tracked, how brilliant is that? That's amazing.
Yes.
And so necessary, because if we're going to exist as a society, it's going to take more than just the survivors coming forward. Like I passed my DNA along and then it was out of my hands. And
Right.
thankfully, there's a due process. I remember wanting to hug every member of the jury, and I wasn't able to talk to any of them. But I now I love the system for what it is. But that being said, I'm recognizing the flaws in it, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to make positive change. And
Right.
obviously you believe in that because here you
Yes.
are having
Yes.
changed careers and you're doing it and people believe in you. And I believe that it's going to take an entire society and to talk to everybody a part of this terrible thing that hopefully, like you said, through education, we can have some prevention. That's the only way to move forward, I think.
So we have a handful of pathways, and I really can see a platform of survivors because right now, today, uh, despite the fact that we have advanced science and technology that helps us to identify and apprehend offenders, there are still people who um, were raped 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago who do not know who he is.
Right.
They have no idea. And I received a call just today from a woman who was raped, and she learned that the offender was set for a court date today at 1:30, and somehow she thought that meant he was released, like he was going to be released. And the she was so terrified. She was so terrified because she thought he was back on the street, and she's like, no one's contacted me. And so fortunately I was able to contact the jail and spoke with Sheriff Wilcher, and he told me that um, the perpetrator is still incarcerated. But just to see how paralyzed and how fearful every step in this process is, um, you want to be able to provide a lot of information and education. So you have that pathway of, do we create a platform where a survivor can join us somehow and be able to talk about um, how what the process, what the criminal justice system process looks like. We do know that we have advocacy groups, we have rape crisis centers, we have victim advocates within the district attorney's office. But as you stated, when you are in that condition, you really are not inclined, or you don't desire to go into these public places. Um, Counseling support. Everybody is not ready to get counseling right after they have been traumatized. And so, possibly having a safe space or a safe group where individuals can join in via technology as opposed to person, um, giving them that initial comfort that they need to have enough courage to get support. And I recommend counseling support to all of survivors. And then you
100%.
have, um, uh, maybe there's a opportunity to create um, an awareness or an advocacy group where you're going to, help find the offender, where everybody puts in what the profile of their offender was, um, what city you were in, what time of day it was. This is what the person looked like. They drove this type of car. And you never know. Look what Facebook has done. Maybe
Right.
creating a Facebook group for survivors who do not know who their offenders are, and they can go on and say, and not necessarily fully identify themselves, but say, this is what happened to me on this day. Um,
Right.
and you have other times where you have people who are being victimized by family members. You have some people who have that same uncle or that same grandfather, or that same coach who has been molesting and raping uh, children and women year after year, girl after girl, woman after woman, and never stopped
Right.
because no one has a safe space or place to say something about it. But if you had this platform and someone decides to say, I was a student at um, Shaw High School in North Carolina, and this coach did this to me, somebody else is probably going to have that experience. And then you start to build this community of people who can support each other. So or just having a platform like this where we extend an opportunity for survivors to let their voice be heard and to help people understand that when you get to own your survivorship and when you get to allow your voice to be heard, that's empowering. And so
Right.
I don't know what's going to be birthed out of this, Brittany, but I do know that it's going to be something great. And I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Oh, well, I'm very excited for you to be. I couldn't imagine anybody to not be. You were the first person that I called when I just said, what should I do? But you saying empowering is really just what encompasses the whole healing journey. The people that I mentor, I always try to say, you will feel super empowered someday, no matter if it is that you're seeking justice or healing. You taking control of the situation again is so empowering. I remember the day at court, I was so terrified to see him in person because I thought I would have nightmares and all these things. And I remember looking at him and just feeling so empowered instead of scared. And like you said, with women not knowing who it was for all those years that I lived in Savannah for years after that. And he said, if I tell anybody, he will find me, he will kill me.
Mm.
And I still decided to just take that risk and tell somebody. And he obviously lived amongst me for, I think, another 5 years or so. We found out where he lived and everything. And And it is very scary thinking that, are they still out there? And there are professionals, detectives and police who, if you are afraid, especially if it's somebody that you know, if you are afraid to come forward, because I know that that can be dangerous sometimes, that there's help. And I think that's the biggest thing about the work that you and I do, is that since everybody's experience is different, the people that they were assaulted by, the people that they were raped by, the support system that they do or don't have, to know that no matter what your situation is, there's definitely somebody out there who's been through what you've been through, or been trained to help what you've been through. Like, I think when we go through these traumatic things, we think nobody's ever going to understand what I went through. And that's what's so scary to come forward and say. But there is opportunity to feel empowered and to not try to suppress it, because that doesn't work either. Eventually it comes back up. But yeah.
Speaking of that, tell us about you. You had an interesting way of how you dealt with it, and that was through exercise. Tell us about that.
Yes. So another thing I keep mentioning.
I'm throwing these things out there, just hoping it's gonna stick. So based on our conversation.
In hindsight, like I said, I continued to train with Coach Carter, Sam Carter. And after I left school, I'd never stopped working out. And, he told all of us, like, you guys feel comfortable in the gym now, you keep going. Don't let, like us as women, like sometimes it can be intimidating to go into a gym. And he showed us how to use everything and whatever. So, but for me, I didn't realize during those moments that I stopped working out, how much my mental health needed it. So I've continued for 15 years to actively work out. And I know that that's like a huge fad now in society, is being healthy, and that's fantastic. But mental health is a huge part of it as well. And to be able to keep up with your counseling and all of that is important, but that might only happen bi-weekly or monthly or on a need-to basis, or when your groups meet. And I think for me, working out in many different realms is what I always happen to suggest to the people that I mentor. I tell them, call me at any time. And, one of the girls that I'm working with now recently called me at 3 a.m., panic attack, crying. She says, I've tried to meditate. I've tried to do whatever. And I'm like, let's do some push-ups. I know it sounds crazy, but it's what got her through it. And had Sam Carter not taught me how, or teach me how to work out, I don't know where I'd be. It's a good question, but that is definitely something that I'm going to implement in the future somehow, some way. Maybe Sam is going to help me.
Well, we certainly are here for that. We are here for that. And you are now a part of my, have always been a part of my community of survivors, but I do have a community of survivors who are taking that next step into advocacy and championing this work. And you've done that already. And I just want to encourage you to continue. And anytime you want to come back on Candidly Kesha and let's talk more, I would love to get you and Representative Holcomb together so that you all can bounce some ideas off as well. And he's always sponsoring various bills related to rape advocacy, and having a survivor's voice helps to get those bills over the hurdle sometimes.
Right.
So I'm definitely going to connect the two of you.
And I look forward to that.
Yes. Now, is there anything else you want to share? I just, this is a good break from local government. There's a lot going on right now. And one of the reasons I was so excited to come to the city of Savannah was to be able to change things within our municipal government as it relates to our Metropolitan Police Department, and we're still working toward that. We're still working toward it. We miss our work immensely here in Savannah with regard to rape advocacy, but for whatever reason, God saw fit to move me to this next level so that we can work more proactively as opposed to reactively. And as we continue to come together and be the voice and the change that we want to see in this continuum, and going forth with the spirit of empowerment. And that is very, very important, because in the course of a person being molested and being raped and being sodomized, what happens is they're stripped from their power.
Right.
So the first step toward healing or getting to the next step on your journey is empowerment. Having that person uh, own every step along the way, making their own decisions. And so that's what we're here for. And as we continue to support survivors, encourage them, we want to also remind everybody that rape and child molestation is a public health issue. Rapists are recidivists; they're not specialists. And when people molest children, they don't do it just one time. And so it's really, really scary. It's easy for us to say, but having the experience, I think it gives us a right to say that it was not your fault. It was not okay. And it's okay to get help and tell a trusted adult or tell a family member or a friend who you can trust to help you along the way. Brittany, thank you so very much for joining me
Thank you,
tonight.
Keisha.
And
It was a
we'll be in touch.
pleasure.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'll
Yes.
probably be checking in with you maybe next week to see if we are any closer.
Yes, please do. Have a great night. Thank you
You
so much
too.
again.
Thank you so much. We love you, Savannah, and thank you, ATR.